that we started approximately 3 years ago, and we're really pleased with the Fiduciary Education Forum's advancement in education itself. It's purely was created as we learned years and years ago from the need from both our clients and their clients, just to spread around everybody's knowledge and wisdom and experiences in their specific business. So the Fiduciary Education Forum's website is fiduciaryforum.com. There you will see years of presentations that have been recorded for your downloading view it for you to view. Also, the presentations themselves. Um, so, yeah, both myself and our team and our companies, I should say, are just really pleased to have everybody participate in FE, as we call it, FEF. Our real focus is purely about education, and that's really it, simply. And moving on to that, I want to say that I'm really honored to have Danielle Campbell and Mike Novak from ProFiduciary in San Diego take the time out of their very, very busy schedules to make this presentation to the group. Um, I will say that I've worked with both Danielle and Mike over the years. They have a very large fiduciary practice and company in the San Diego market. I've known Mike Novak, I hate to say it, for maybe 20 years. It's been a very long time.
Since I started.
Danny, not as long. That's why she looks like a lot younger than I do, thankfully. But I'd like first to, before we get started on the presentation, and the topic today for everybody is common mistakes by non-professional trustees, poor record keeping, mismanagement, and fiduciary breaches. It's the topic that we sent out in the e-blast is going to cover a lot of or is going to cover a lot the points we want to make during this presentation. I will make a version of this presentation available. It's a PowerPoint that Mike put together with some tweaks. We'll make that available at a later time. But before we get started, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself first to our audience?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Novak. I am a private fiduciary here at ProFiduciary. I've been in the fiduciary business for over 30 years now, and I'm very happy to have become a fiduciary with ProFiduciary about 5 years ago.
Okay, and then I will say Mike is quite modest, as he always is, but uh, we met when he worked at Wells Fargo, their trust in their trust group years and years and years ago. So Mike's knowledge is, quite deep in the fiduciary and trust world. Danielle, it's up to you now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Campbell, also with ProFiduciary. I've been handling trust administration since 2016 and licensed since 2019. And I have worked with Todd on multiple different occasions.
Well, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with Mike and ask, Mike, do you want to before I actually get into some of these questions, is there kind of an overview you want to give our viewers about the presentation topics that we're going to discuss today?
Sure. I think, as more and more individuals or couples are using trusts to settle their estates at the ends of their lives, it's not uncommon. We see this often that they turn to people who they know and trust the most, family members, friends, etc. And while it may seem natural to turn to the person who you find most trustworthy, because you're giving them something sensitive like managing their assets, taking care of their children, grandchildren, etc., that trustworthiness does not necessarily translate into skill level in terms of executing those duties. So I think the purpose of today's presentation is really to kind of point out why you're best working with a professional fiduciary rather than somebody who you may naturally find to be the most trustworthy.
Um, so I'm gonna try to be the moderator today. We have about an hour, and we'll take Q&A at the end if nobody wants to ask questions during the presentation. But from our perspective, for those of you who know us, we provide a litany of a myriad of services in our different companies, appraisals, we broker real estate, we auction real estate, we lend on real estate, we sell partnership interests, uh, both and all through our different organizations. But one thing I have learned, and this was really why I wanted to have Mike and Danielle speak today, was that I've worked with lawyers that have become trustees for estates, and currently working on an estate, as I would call it, a friend of the individual who is tasked to be the trustee of the trust. We're selling approximately $150 million of real estate throughout the US for this client. And this client, as well represented with the individual who's passed on, who has been tasked with selling this portfolio of real estate and partnership interests. As great of a real estate background professional he had, he was very unaware of the nuances of selling through a trust process. And I think that's really where I'd like to start with Mike, is that, we all have individual knowledge, and I think a lot of the time, um, whoever the party is that's looking to appoint a successor trustee or a fiduciary, however you want to define it, they may not understand the roles and the skill sets required. So, Mike, with that, some of the first things that you want to talk about, unfamiliar with the probate code and accounting. Let's start with that.
Sure. I think, oftentimes people who are highly skilled and maybe, as Todd mentions, managing a real estate portfolio may not be the best skilled in terms of doing that in the context of acting as a fiduciary. And I guess the best example I can give of that is that if you're really skilled at a particular task, you may have things that you do that you just know are the right things to do from your experience. When you're a fiduciary, you certainly have that knowledge. You know things that are the right things to do, but you also need to do it in a way that you can demonstrate to the beneficiaries was in fact the right decision for them. So your kind of go-to gut reaction about what you should do as a trustee might in fact be the right thing to do. But if you don't know the probate code, if you don't know that you're supposed to provide accountings and you're supposed to paper your file to explain how you came to a certain decision, you're not actually fulfilling your duty as a fiduciary.
Um, so I guess with that, Mike, let's talk about liability, which is always the red herring in the room. And right, if for your business, in our business, it's a limiting liability for the fiduciary, for the trustee. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Sure. And I'm going to continue to use real estate examples because my my background is primarily in real estate. That's how I got to know Todd way back when. Um, I see this a lot. I've seen this a lot over my career. You'll have a trustee who will say, I know a guy or I know somebody or a family member wants to buy this property for X dollars. And if I sell it to him, I'm not going to pay a broker's commission. I'm going to save X percent. And so I'm actually going to net more money than I would if I put it on the market. Or here's another one. I had the property appraised and it appraised for Y dollars. And that's the value of the property. So I'm going to sell it for Y dollars. let me talk about both of those that explain why that's not being a good fiduciary. If you sell a property off market and you're saving a broker's commission, you really have no idea whether that buyer, that new owner, is going to turn around and flip it for perhaps a higher sales price. So if you've got that neighbor who's willing to pay for the property and buy it right away, and not pay a broker's commission, that neighbor may turn around and sell it for 10, 20% more. And frankly, the beneficiaries would probably have a case in coming after the fiduciary and saying, hey, you left 10 or 20% of the sales price on the table because you chose not to put it on the market and find out what in fact was the highest sales price. You thought you were saving commission. I actually would have netted out more money had you paid a commission and sold it for 10 or 20% more. So you really need to think about how you're making your decisions and how you're able to justify that was the right decision at the end of the day.
Well, let me ask you, Mike. Since I think the bulk of our viewers are in the trust and estate world that are on our call today. Part of the topic, I think part of at least we find this serving people like professionals like you all is, what kind of advice would you give a fiduciary that is being interviewed uh, and possibly selected to become the role for the family, however you want to define that role? What kind of advice would you give them in making in I hate to use the word, but educating, well, I say selling and educating that party to why they should use a fiduciary? What what would you say there?
I was interviewed earlier today by a husband and wife. Husband inherited a chunk of an operating business from his parents, a successful business, and he has one brother and several sisters. The brother was involved in the business, the sisters were not. But mom and dad leaving their shares to their children, only two of which were actively involved in the company, one of whom was primarily driving the company, he's the head of the company, caused a lot of disharmony amongst the siblings. The brother who was not the head of the company felt that he should be treated co-equally as the brother who was running the company and had been running it for a long time. I don't know the full extent of the family disharmony after the second parent passed away, but he and his wife are happily married. They have 4 children who get along very well. And as they see today, nothing could go wrong. But because of what happened with him, acting as trustee for his parents' estate and having to deal with his siblings and funding their shares in the company and who's going to run what and who's going to have what kind of control over the company, he said just based upon that alone, he wanted to hire a neutral third party. So I think, in terms of the value that you can sell yourself as a potential fiduciary for a client, it's about being that neutral party who wasn't at the family table when an argument came up, or you weren't the family member who caused mom and dad a lot of grief. And therefore, you can be neutral in talking to all the family members about how the trust is being administered and how the assets are being divvied out to the various family members.
Okay. Danielle, I'm going to move to you. Talking about international beneficiaries, which is, of course, being here in California is amazingly common. We see it almost with candidly 40, maybe even 50% of the transactions we're involved with. Why don't you start talking about to our audience about that and your experiences and thoughts?
Sure, I actually have a current case study that I'm handling where all the beneficiaries are abroad, and I had to educate them a lot. 2 of them wanted to be trustee, and it ended up that I came into the matter. But I had to educate them. They didn't know what a US CPA was. They didn't know the different tariffs between the different countries for different beneficiaries. So there's a lot of tax liability. They didn't know what an IRA was. And they all wanted to liquidate it right away. And that would have been huge tax implications. So stepping in as a professional, I know who to ask, I know what to do, I know how to advise them and get through these things and processes quickly and hire the right professionals to handle all this accurately.
So let me ask you, when you're advising a potential client about your skill sets, how do you I mean, this is a common question that we get. So I'm gonna put you in the hot seat. What would you how would you say how would you answer this question? Assuming I'm one of the family members interviewing you, and let's say this is, I mean, I'm just making this up. It's a $20 million estate, right? And one of the family members says, well, we're speaking to Northern Trust, and we're considering, look, company and you, Danielle, but we're also talking Northern Trust. How would you differentiate yourself from a trust company? What would you say to the parties that ask that question?
Sure. So there's a few differences between individual fiduciaries and then trust companies. Northern, Wells Fargo, any of the big banks. Um, I'd say the biggest advantage is that you're getting the individual as trustee that you can email or call directly. You're not getting a 1-800 number, which I often find is the source with these trust companies. You get a department, so you're not getting a person. And also, it's the ease for your beneficiaries to communicate with that person, their trustee, their person that's handling everything. Instead of a whole department or shuffled through the emails. Another thing is fees. Typically, those larger departments, they cost a lot more. They have higher fee percentages, and individual fiduciaries are a benefit, not only just, personalized, but their fees are usually a lot less or tend to be a lot less.
Danielle, maybe you want to briefly talk about your experience with a bank that shall remain unnamed in terms of trying to take over an account where they were removed and you were appointed.
Yeah, I will not name that bank because I've met good and poor people at that bank. But I was named back in December, provided everything to the bank promptly to have the trust administration move to me because the beneficiary had appointed me in lieu of them. And I am still to this day working on getting anything from that bank. I have a department that I'm working with. I've got my attorney now working with them. We're looking at filing a court order to forcibly make them transfer everything to me as trustee, which is quite ridiculous in this atmosphere. So that's just an explanation of how difficult they can be, even for us.
Danielle, let me ask you this. If again, assuming I'm the third person interviewing you, if I asked you this question, which would be, um, can I be involved in the decision-making process of, let's call it, any important decision I feel is relevant through you being the fiduciary? Can I be involved in that decision-making process? Because I was told by the XYZ Trust Company that I could not, and everything is completely their decision once they're hired. How would you respond to that?
I would say that individual fiduciaries tend to work more closely with the beneficiaries. I know we certainly do, but everything is dictated or determined by the trust document. So I'd say as long as I'm working within the trust document, I'll certainly take, your value or, what you want to take place into consideration, as long as we're going by the trust and the probate code. But yeah, there's an example would be, um, for instance, we have a trust where the client has, or the beneficiary has the option to purchase one of the properties or to take one of the properties outright. So I'm working with them in that decision making of, well, the tax implications be property tax, you know, um, is it best to sell it now with a step up in cost basis? So those are all things that we can look at. That's an example. Another thing is, taking stocks or securities in kind. So yeah, you can have options and we can certainly look to facilitate that a little easier rather than the big trust companies just making the decision.
Mike, you have anything you want to add to that?
When you asked that question, what immediately came to mind was a trust that I have where I'm trustee, and it was created because the beneficiary is a spendthrift, and she's a lovely human being, but she is crazy, and she has some ideas about investing in politics and what's going to happen in the world, and um, I can't tell you how many times she's told me she wants me to sell everything and only buy gold. Only buy gold. That's all she wants me to buy is gold. And I've listened to her on several occasions. I try and keep her out of the financial advisor's ear because I don't want him to not work with me on future assignments. But I have, asked him to give me some information, whether it's something I pass along, in the form of an email or some kind of white paper he might have that talks about diversification, concentration, gold as an investment, or even just materials as a hard assets as a investments. And that has gone a long way to kind of placate her, and I think help keep her in my good graces. Help keep me in her good graces, I should say.
Mhm. Okay. Um, so Danielle, moving on to another example, caregiving costs in improper care of a trustor. Why don't we start with that? But I think I'm going to go back to the question because again, we're all in this world somewhat, in at least in our what we do in our companies, together with you all. And um, I personally have a belief that a fiduciary is invaluable when it comes to the health and welfare of an individual, more so than a major trust company, because there's just that hands-on approach, that immediate response, that 24 hours, 7 day a week kind of care. Danny, how would you, what would you like to start off with that regarding that?
Sure. So I added this case study because we see this a lot. A lot of fiduciaries do, where we're coming into a situation where the family member or the friend who's the current trustee just doesn't know what to do, and not by any fault of their own. This current one was a woman that was deemed incapacitated, and she was living in her home. Caregiver costs for in-home care were through the roof, so she was quickly burning through all of her trust funds. There were also predatory individuals that were coming in and out of the house, posing as friends, but assets were going missing, such as valuables, cash. The woman, the trustor, was being predatorized, and she was being told to go to the bank and take money out of the ATM, and then that would go missing. So it was a very difficult situation. And the friend that was the trustee just kind of put her hands up, again, not to any fault of her own, but she just didn't know what to do. So I came in, I was appointed as trustee. I was able to get the trustor out of that situation and into proper care, that she was receiving full 24-hour memory care, not eating away at her funds, and then make her asset of her home productive also eliminating those predatory people, and assets stopped going missing. So, situations like that where it's kind of a mess, we see a lot of those that we come into, and we're able to help and make sure that that person's getting the proper care and their assets are being cared for as well.
So do you think, again, going along the lines of if you're making a presentation to a potential party that's looking to engage you versus a trust company, that would be let's call it a check on the right side of the column for the private fiduciary versus the monster trust company to
I
serve
definitely,
here?
yeah, I definitely think so. I like to say that we're kind of boots on the ground immediately. We're not just going into a 9 to 5 desk job. We may not be 24 hours a day available, but we're certainly making the time to go see those trustors. I visit all of my clients that are in memory care, even if they do or do not have family in the country, just to advocate for them and make sure they're being taken care of as the, memory care facility is supposed to, or they're being fed or getting their medications. So we're advocating for our clients much more than some department.
Mhm. I would agree. Moving on to, let's call it the emotional ties and inexperience, which can disrupt trust administration. Mike, you want to give us a case study that you felt was valuable here,
Sure,
the viewers?
sure. Danielle and I actually worked on this one together. This is um, a family that had owned a lot of real estate in La Jolla, and at some point in the family, as the wealth was being transferred down, the family members kind of stopped working, and they started selling properties off over time to fund their existence. And there was a mother and 4 children. When she died, she disinherited one of her 3 children, and there were 3 left. She named her daughter as the first successor trustee. When she became successor trustee of her mother's trust, she really didn't do anything to administer the trust. Um, and then she passed away, and then there were 2 brothers left, and then the one other disinherited family member. And the 2 brothers hated each other, one of whom had recovered from a significant addiction problem, and the other of whom had the one who became the successor trustee had some really deep personality disorder, I believe. Um, there was just a ton of things that they did incorrectly. The main family home, which the family had been able to hold on to, was probably the worst home I had ever seen in La Jolla. When you stood on the second floor of the house and you looked up, you could see blue sky. There was a meth fire that had destroyed the kitchen from the one brother who was an addict at one point. There was another fire in the garage that had ruined the roof in that building for a while. After mom died, the one son who was a former addict became a hoarder, and the house was just full of trash. There was a boat in the front yard of the house, just to tell you how bad it was. So there was a ton of problems by the time Danielle and I stepped in. Tax returns had not been filed. There was an asset that was supposed to be distributed to the one daughter, a small piece of property that was supposed to be distributed to the one daughter who became successor trustee. That was never distributed to her. When the daughter died, the house that they all lived in was supposed to be sold, and then proceeds from that was supposed to fund the trust for the brother who was a recovered addict, a spendthrift trust, and then the other share was supposed to go outright to the other brother. That never happened, and she died, I think, 2, 3, 4 years before we stepped in. I don't remember at the time. We spent just an inordinate amount of time trying to clean up that property, get it secured, get it sold. and maximize the sales price for that home. I think a lot of corporate fiduciaries would have looked at that property and said, "There's just no way we're taking this on." Things were so bad at the property because the brother kept on trying to hardwire the electricity to the house. The power company, SDG&E, went through the trouble of disconnecting the power line that ran from the pole to the house. Because if they just disconnected it at the box of the house, the brother just went up there and hotwired it anyway. So they took the line out from the house all the way to the pole to prevent him from doing that. So it was crazy. We had to board up the house. We had to get a power generator in there. We had to run lights and cords through the house so that when people did go inside, they could see their way around. It was probably the worst home that I've come across in my career. And
And security for all the meth friends.
yeah, I mean, it was just a tremendous amount of time spent trying to get our arms around that house and sell it. And then it was a property in a very desirable location within La Jolla, and it was kind of tucked in this area that people couldn't see so much. So the neighbors were certainly complaining to the city about it, but it wasn't such an eyesore that the whole neighborhood came up in arms about it. And there was a wall around a good portion of the property too, so you couldn't see so much of it. But we really, really faced a challenge to try and maximize the sales price for that home. And I'm happy to say we sold it for a lot more money than we expected. And I think it's because we put in the time and effort to clean it up, and manage a sales process that really got a bunch of people who were interested in a big chunk of land in La Jolla competing against each other to buy that home. And I can't tell you how many criticisms we received from the two brothers along the way. You're not giving me my money. You're not doing this correctly. I should be able to decide this. One of the brothers was refusing to take his personal property out of the house. And finally we said, forget this. I think I may have used other language. And we took his property and we went and rented a storage locker for him and prepaid it for, I think, 2 or 3 months. And we told him, your stuff is in that locker. Here's the key. Here's the contract. You're either going to pay that contract after the 2 or 3 months is up, or they're going to go off and sell it or whatever. But we're taking your stuff out of the house. You're not going to hold us hostage anymore. And that allowed us to go forward with the sale of the home. There was just so much emotional drama around everything with that property. It was very draining. It was very draining. But we'll be stories about it forever.
Let me ask both of you again, kind of going along the lines of, for all of our viewers today, you're trying to and want to know ways to differentiate yourself. So when you're being interviewed, right, as a professional come in some form, what is it that you're saying about yourself, and what case studies can you use and examples that you can use that may very well help you get it, be selected versus a trust company or um, anybody. I know we've got a number of examples I'd like to talk about, but um, here's one I think that would benefit all of you. I don't know if we have any attorneys on this call on the call today, but we had a case a few years ago where a client who passed away. Well, let me say it this way: he was an attorney by training and was asked to become the successor trustee of an extremely valuable trust that owned about 85 million, 90 million of real estate, um, a very large car collection, equipment, inventory, uh, the shell of an operating business that was extremely successful. And the unfortunate thing was that there was one child who was adopted, who was, believe it or not, a two-time felon. And the trustee, well, the successor trustee, who, as I said, was a family friend, who was an attorney, a practicing attorney, who had no idea about what it was like to become a trustee. Um, it wasn't his business. He was a lawyer, but he did it as a as a well, really as a courtesy to his client. I mean, that's really what it came down to. Long story short, I don't want to take too much time away from Danielle and Mike, but what I learned from that case was it was a very unfortunate demise ending to it. Is that we were brought in to sell all the assets, be it the real estate and the car collection and um, inventory. And two of the cars were actually sold to the Peterson Automobile Museum in Los Angeles. Very famous collector. But the adopted son was as I said, a two-time felon and unfortunately a drug addict. And he was spending all of his money as fast as he could get it, as fast as he was given it. And the attorney who was running the estate, who was absolutely out of his it didn't, really didn't have the skill set to deal with the individual, the son. We got involved in many more ways than we ever expected to. Um, and during the process, I said to him, why not just come in and appoint, well, a major trust company and let them handle this and just leave this headache for them because it's clearly a horrible, stressful situation for you. And he said, well, if I did that, then I wouldn't honor my agreement with his parents. And, candidly, I just couldn't do that. And um, the takeaway was at one point during the sale process, the son held himself up in this very large industrial building where he was selling assets from to feed his drug addiction. And when we went there to gain access, he opened the door and pointed a gun to the face of a number of my associates, and said, "If you step in here, I'm going to shoot you, and I don't care if I go to jail, but you won't." This is a very bad situation. I called the trustee. He said, "Look, if I call the sheriff." It'll be a three times, the three-time felon in the state of California, this was. He'd go to jail for the rest of his life. And I could never live with myself. And he said, I don't want you to call the sheriff. Just please leave. And which we did. And he solved the problem in his way, which was getting him this son out of the building. And again, feeding him with money, unfortunately, to help his drug addiction, which then allowed us to go and sell the assets in the building and the building itself. Long story short, it was about a 9-month process of sale for us as a company doing all the things that we were doing. And about 2 weeks after we were done with the actual case, the attorney was in his doctor's office because he had very high blood pressure. He was in horrible stress. I became friendly with his wife through the process. He dropped dead in the doctor's office. The stress from the year and a quarter of dealing with the son was just beyond him. I mean, it was a horrible situation. So I only bringing this up to all of you is, reflecting on those case studies that you all have in presenting, what you do versus what somebody else claims they could do and how you manage it, right? How you manage the problems and try to mitigate, risk, but mitigate stress. I think is very important. I mean, I think it's for us, it's a common question when we're selling a client's property. Would you rather have the property or the stress of owning the property? Simple question. You'd be surprised how many times I hear I don't want to own the property anymore. Um, Mike, let's go on to no, sorry, Danielle, you have an example of a 21-year-old daughter you want to bring up?
Yeah, this was just a quick case study to tie on the emotional and inexperience that people might have. You know, we never see an easy case, um, but emotions are very much tied up in each of these for family members. In this particular one, sadly, a 21-year-old daughter had passed away, and she had a fairly sizable estate. And the parents were going through a divorce when she passed. So they both absolutely hated each other, despised anything the other did. It didn't matter if it was right or wrong. So it was a very, very sticky, emotional situation. You know, they both just lost their only child. They both are divorcing each other and trying to figure that out. So after quite a few months of squabbling, I got involved and came in to just do the job. And, you know, what I said kind of just went. It was, I'm the neutral third party. I'm not the husband or the wife that you despise. You know, I'm just here to do the job. And it really calmed everyone and helped them to take emotions out of it to where I would converse with each of them individually. And that way they weren't on things together. So it really helped to mitigate the situation. So that was just an example of when we come in, we can really help squash the emotional aspect.
Uh, Danielle, let me ask you, when you're again kind of again going along the same lines of advising clients why they should hire you in the cases you want to be hired. And I'm sure there are many you don't want to be hired, and you don't, you fire the client before they come the client, which sometimes is the best type of client to fire. How do you address the question about fees and costs versus, let's call it, the big trust company? Is there anything you want to give our viewers as just insights to that question?
So cost versus the big trust company is, first of all, there's a lot of cases that the trust companies will not take on,
Right.
way more than an individual fiduciary. Like all the ones that we're talking about, Mike and I, a trust company would definitely not take any of these on. So you're getting a professional still with the experience, the vendors, the resources at their disposal, but without the high cost and high, I guess, likelihood that they reject it as a big trust company. So I think there's huge benefit in that. You know, while I say we take the emotions out of a lot of our cases and we're able to be that neutral third party, we're also very hand-holding more than the trust companies. So we're still there. We're still helping these beneficiaries get through this, you know, in their own process. But again, we're not just a 1-800 number or department.
Well, I think that's a good point. Mike, let's talk about this example you'd like everybody to hear about the three children, the son, the two daughters, as an example.
Sure. So this is actually a very sad story. Mom and dad built up a real estate portfolio over many decades. They had three kids, one son and two daughters. I think there was a bit of chauvinism in the family because the son was kind of engaged in the business and the daughters were not really allowed to participate. And when mom and dad passed away, they named the son the head of the company that ran everything. They also named him trustee of all trusts, including all the trusts for his sisters as well. And he also, his kids got a little bit of a larger share than his nieces and nephews did as well. So I'm sure there wasn't a lot of family harmony resulting from that. But to make things worse, he was probably the worst person to manage this portfolio of real estate. I don't think his father actually ever had him fully engaged in managing the portfolio with him while he was alive. The son has some other activities that he likes to spend time on, um, separate from managing the family portfolio of real estate. And so what happened is that the two sisters sued their brother to have him removed first as trustee from their trusts so that they could become trustees of their own trusts. And then they sued to have him removed as the manager of the family company. And so um, we were contacted because they were looking for a neutral party to manage the assets. So this isn't a trustee or a fiduciary appointment. This is an asset management appointment that we took on. So we were hired to manage the family company and take care of the portfolio. And when we stepped in, there's a total of maybe 60 units between all the apartment buildings. They're all right near each other here in San Diego. But two of the buildings, the two largest buildings, were in desperate need of being re-roofed. And the son just had a real aversion to paying anybody else a lot of money other than himself. So any of the repair and maintenance, any of the unit turnovers, he wanted to do that, and he wanted to pay himself for that. And he got bids to do the roofs, but he wouldn't pay anybody to do it. He just kept on hiring these handyman type guys to come in and patch the roofs, which was a disaster. Because the roofs would constantly leak. We took over in November, so beginning of or October, beginning of rainy season, and by the middle of the following spring, we had to replace two of the roofs on an emergency basis because they were leaking so frequently that we would go in, fix a unit that had been leaked, and then the roof would leak again and destroy the exact same unit. Or we'd turn over a unit to rent to a new tenant, and it would get flooded with rain because the roof was still leaking. So we had to put the hold on all projects, re-roof the buildings, and then be able to do everything, all the projects that fell below the roof line. It's been a really difficult journey with this family because there's such intense animosity amongst the family about how the one brother slash uncle grossly mismanaged this portfolio. The family had, I think, kind of an idea of how bad things were, but when I stepped up and said, hey, of these 7 properties, here's one we need to sell. We just don't have the money in our pocket to pay to turn this building around. And the property manager and I worked together to get bids to do all the things that need to be done in that building. And this is really sad because this building is located near an area of this community that's turning over. Some of the older buildings are being demolished, and new, multi-story new apartment buildings are going up. We just didn't have the money to even hold on to this building because of the debt service issue and the vacancy. We didn't have the money to take care of all the turnovers in the building. And they didn't believe me. They thought I was just being alarmist and things couldn't be that bad. So I had to schedule a day and invite anybody in the family who wanted to show up. And only people from the two sisters branches of the family showed up. And I walked them through the entire building. I walked them through every vacant unit. Almost all the vacant units were as they had been left to me by the son up through his management of the property. And they were just finding their jaws on the floor about how bad it was. They thought these were kind of cosmetic, new carpet, paint kinds of things. They were shocked when they walked into these units to find all the walls removed, and in some cases the floors removed because of water damage from the leaking roofs. And I said to them, "This is why we can't afford to keep this building anymore. We need to sell this building." And they changed their mind. Those two sisters branches of the family finally turned around and agreed to sell that building. It took another 6 months to actually get the building listed because the brother was a holdout. But it was what had happened prior to our involvement. It was just so damaging to the economic interests of the beneficiaries in terms of their wealth. They're going to lose out a lot of money. And I don't have any skin in the game. I'm just managing the company, but they probably have standing to sue their brother for mismanagement of the properties during his tenure and probably recover a lot of money. But that's up to them to pursue, not me.
So I think, again, going back to one of the themes of this presentation is for all of you who are looking to become, or you're looking to differentiate yourself to a client, is talking about these professional experiences that you might have as you do in your individual business as fiduciaries or conservators or however, whatever role you would be being brought in on, is the expertise of not your just yourself, but your team of professionals um, that can act quickly and make decisions with logic, with precision, and doing so in a way that, as I think Mike might agree, I don't want to put him in the hot seat, that the larger or the trust companies would not do or can't do quickly. Can't take the process in hand and make rapid decisions. Um, we see this for us, we see it every day. And I can't tell you how frustrating it becomes for us doing what we do. Um, so, again, differentiating yourselves in your role and your expertise with case studies. I mean, I always say case studies sell expertise. You don't need to talk about yourself. All you need to do is talk about the case studies and how you've handled them. And that in itself will explain to the clients, what kind of expertise you have, and the role that you would take in that situation. So, um, I think that's very, very, very important. Um, I'm going to go back to you, Danielle. One of the points that I understand when you talk about takeaways, let's talk about a couple of the points. I'll let you start with some of the points of your takeaways.
Sure. So I think the biggest takeaway that I always hear is, well, I want to hire my family member or friend, not just because I trust them, and this is a sensitive matter, but you charge and you cost fees.
Mm,
Well, I can't tell you how many situations Mike and I and other fiduciaries like us step into after that family member or friend has prolonged administration, messed it up, set liability up. Everyone's suing each other. We're coming into these nasty situations where if we were hired at the onset and just handled the administration the way it was supposed to be from the beginning, our fees wouldn't really matter because we would have saved a ton of time and legal fees and litigation, mediation, all those things because we would have handled it correctly. Everything would have been done. Beneficiaries would have received their distributions, and everybody could have gone on their way. And it's in the best interest of all parties at that point. So I think that's the biggest takeaway is, people are scared of fees, but it's really saving their estate fees in the long run.
mhm. I mean, one thing that's just fresh in my mind for all of you, I mean, we're asset driven or we're problem solvers based on the asset, the property we're dealing with. But I think one of the things that both Mike and Danielle and all of you have to explain, and you all have different opinions about this because you all have counsel that advises you, and there are many different opinions about this. Mike probably I know has his own. I think when you talk about that value add approach uh, that you can offer as the fiduciary when preparing the sale of some real estate, um, or as we're doing now for a client, what liability that you may take on by doing so. And how do you limit your liability? What are you going to do to candidly keep yourself out of harm's way, pre-sale, post-sale? Um, we probably could do a presentation for an hour just on post-sale liability that we're seeing in the markets today. 1-800 call your attorney for mold, as I like to call it. So I think it's very, very important to make decisions not just that's best for your client, but also that is going to keep you out of harm's way. And having the types of professionals that can help you make that right decision, whatever it might be. Um, Mike, do you have any thoughts about that at all you want to add?
Um, in terms of, are you talking about the liability for a fiduciary?
Yeah, correct.
So I think, we carry an errors and omissions policy here at ProFiduciary, which covers all of our acts acting as a fiduciary. For the asset management work I do, I have separate, insurance covering me for liabilities associated with that. I just think it's really critical for anybody who's considering to be a fiduciary to think about what are the potential downsides. I think oftentimes it's very easy for somebody to get starstruck by a really large dollar amount and think, oh, wow, this is going to be a lot of money, or I'm going to get to talk about dealing with an asset everybody knows about, or something like that. You really need to think about, are you the best fit for that? And, I often like to think to myself, I don't try and sell myself or my services to my people. I want them to know who I am, and I want the client to feel like I'm the best fit for them, and I also want to feel like I'm the best fit for them, because I think if when you're the best fit is probably when you're going to have the least liability associated with it. Separate from that, you also really need to know when to ask questions and bring in people to help you assess risks. There's a lot of liability associated with being on title to real estate as a fiduciary, not just mold, but stuff in the ground.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, you better know who to call and ask about. Hey, I'm being asked to be a trustee and it owns this commercial property. What do you think? And you might look at it today and it's got some resale shop operation in it right now, but for all you know, that was a dry cleaner at some point in the past, and dry cleaners are really expensive to clean up. So it's critical for you to know what kinds of questions to ask in order to assess the kinds of risks you're stepping into.
I mean, one of the things that we started doing about 2.5, 3 years ago was having buyers indemnify the fiduciary, the trustee, the seller. Let's call it the seller who is signing on title on the closing documents as the seller to indemnify that party if they are a third party from liability, hence once they purchase the property, once they close escrow. I'm going to tell you we have a 99.9% success rate. It's actually over that. And I don't care if I'm selling, we just sold a $53 million apartment complex for a fiduciary. And the buyer, who is a major REIT, signed an indemnification document upon close. And, that buyer is probably less litigious than the same buyer who's going to buy a condominium wherever you're located, be it in La Jolla or Newport Beach or in Palo Alto. That buyer gets the wrong attorney, and I promise you the grief that you're going to have is going to make your life uh, miserable. So we use these hold harmless indemnification documents for buyers, trying to keep the fiduciary out of risk, out of liability. And so far, well, since we started doing it, it's worked beautifully. But we're seeing more and more horror stories that we're brought into during the process, post-process, for litigation, whatever it might be. It is changing. And I think to Mike's point and to Danielle's point, you really want to assess your client, potential client, and understand risks based upon what it is you're going to be doing for them, whether it's selling a business appraising an asset or selling a property. Um, there's somebody on our in this viewing, this presentation today, who is deeply experienced in selling companies, and could tell you the risks and the pros and cons of doing whatever in association with selling a company. And again, you need these professionals, and differentiating yourself is key. But I know we're at the top of the hour. Does anybody have any questions they want to unmic themselves or unmute themselves and ask our Danielle and Mike quickly? If there is, great. I'd like you to do so now. Also, Mike, would you please tell everybody what your email address is, so if anybody wants to reach out to you directly?
Sure. My email address is mnovak, N-O-V as in Victor, A-K, at ProFiduciary, one word, .com.
And Danielle, would you do the same, please?
Sure. So it's my last name Campbell, Campbell, just like the soup, at profiduciary.com.
Okay, so please, I'm sure both of you would be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Um, we're all here to try to help and guide and give advice and education for whatever we can do. So I really thank Danielle and Mike for taking the time to do this and prepare. And Mike just got it back from a long vacation. So Mike, I hope you are not too jet lagged, and thank you for being on, and Danielle doing the same. And for all of you, uh, getting close to Labor Day, have a great rest of the summer. And this presentation will be on fiduciaryforum.com for your viewing, as there are, dozens and dozens and dozens of other presentations. So please visit that. We are going to have two presentations in September. One about international tax law and issues cross-border between California and Mexico, and with an attorney who specializes in the fiduciary world, who will be speaking on that topic. And then we're going to also have a presentation on a very interesting and becoming a very important topic in the financial world, that is appointing a provisional director. Mike's probably quite familiar with that, but the roles of a provisional director and how they can assist in uh, operating companies and whatever the assets are, and in some cases, private family boards. So we're going to have that presentation in September. So everybody, thank you very much. We sure appreciate you being on. Again, it's Todd Wohl. I'm going to sign off, and have a good summer. Thank you, everybody. We sure happy to see all of you.
Thanks,
Uh,
Mike.
thank
Thanks,
you again,
Danielle,
Mike. Thanks,
Todd,
Danny.
Connor. Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Todd. Good program.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. Bye-bye.